Well, hello there. I'm Dan, and I'm going to talk to you about clinical reasoning today. So, this is going to be a two-part series. The first, oh, this looks very weird in my hands, doesn't it? I'm in the void. The first episode is about how we learn clinical reasoning and what clinical reasoning is. And the second one is an example of a case that you can bring to CCT and other such things using the science of clinical reasoning. So these are the two videos: why we do what we do and a case. So, CR, clinical reasoning. There are over 100 definitions in the literature. And by the way, if you find this interesting, which hopefully you do, because clinical reasoning is sort of what we're all about as doctors, that's how we end up doing things to help patients. I've made a longer video for faculty, and you can see that on my YouTube channel, so just check that out. But clinical reasoning is defined as this long-worded thing, okay? So we've got a cognitive process of knowledge acquisition, salience labeling, and relevant response generation within a modifying ecosystem. Now, you're going to say to me, what on earth are you on about? So knowledge acquisition, just learning, so getting factual information, but also it's not just about what you know, it's the salience, the importance that you label to it, okay? So one of the things that I've always struggled with is really caring about gallstones. So no matter how many times I learn those notes or clerk in patients as a colorectal SHO or what have you, or see them in A&E when I'm locuming, no matter how many times I do, so much of the time I'm looking stuff up because I don't care about gallstones. And I know it's really important, but I don't have the salience labeling. So really, one of my threshold concepts is to find something that really excites me about this so that I will learn it. Or sadly, if something goes wrong and I miss a gallstone that becomes infected, then I'm likely to remember it from a negativity point of view. So that's the issue, right? Relevant response generation. So once you know the content and you know it's important and you feel it's important, are you going to mount a response to it properly within modifying ecosystems? So it's not just how you're feeling on the day, but it's the system in which you're working. So all these things come together to make clinical reasoning. And I see clinical reasoning really as the bridge from you, where you are today, to passing the UKMLA. Because the UKMLA is the knowledge of medicine applied, both in terms of the written exams and the OSCEs. So are you ready for both of those? And it's clinical reasoning that gets you there. Okay? So on the one hand, it's a bridge in medical school and to becoming a doctor that's super important. But what else? It's actually a legal thing. It's a medico-legal thing, okay? So Graeber et al. Did a study in '05, a huge one, and they found in New York that medical error was incredibly common. And when it was, here's what was causing it. So DENs were 22%. Now, what's DENs you're saying? So DENs are doctor educational needs. So things that doctors just did not know. So they didn't know that this sign means this thing, so the patient was misdiagnosed. Or they didn't know that this treatment would cause such and such a thing, okay? So in 22% of cases where patients came to actual harm or death because of misdiagnoses, 22% was due to a lack of knowledge, which means that nearly 8 in 10 of these errors, the vast majority of these errors, were not because of a lack of knowledge. So they'd read it in a book or they'd seen it in a patient before, but they couldn't reason it, they couldn't process it, they couldn't apply it. So the internal and the external problems, internal factors of processing the information and then doing an effective response, or the external factors of something in the environment causing issues to prevent them from seeing things clearly and acting appropriately, was a big problem as well. So how do we remember all of this stuff and how do we use all of this stuff? The whole remit of clinical reasoning. Well, there's 3 things that are really important here, okay? So I want you to think about a guy called Miller, a guy called Badley, and then something called the ERC. Now, what on earth's he on about? Has he gone completely around the bend? No. So Miller's law, this is that short-term memory, your short-term memory, is small. It remembers 4 to 7 chunks of information at once. That's it. You're already on the verge of saturated in this video. Already, okay? Short-term memory, we always overestimate how much we can cram in our brain in one sitting of teaching, of learning, of CCT, of all sorts of things. We really overestimate it. Badly, Okay, so this is that memory is fact plus that emotional salience. So it's a two-track hypothesis, okay? There's the upstream effect, and the upstream effect is the information. The downstream effect is the emotional salience. You need both, and it's not enough just to know one. You need both. So badly is two-stream. And the ERC is the entorhinal cortex. So our hippocampus in particular, our anterior hippocampus, has next to it this thing called the ERC, the entorhinal cortex, by the parahippocampal gyrus, okay? And not to terrify you with neuroanatomy, but the ERC is the triage nurse. It's the GP receptionist. It determines what is important and what is getting through to long-term memory. So content goes into your short-term memory, and the ERC decides whether to move things into long-term memory. And it's long-term memory that you need as a doctor. You can't just have all these facts that get deleted. You've got to know it. So you've got to become best friends with the ERC and learn with the latest neuroscience how to hack the ERC so that you can get as much long-term memory as possible. And that's what I'm saying here. So if I can just get my little clicker up here, so we can just bring in a little bit of neuroanatomy. Can you tell I trained as an anatomist? You've got the hippocampus here, and then just dissected off here is the entorhinal cortex, just there, so you can see. So that's where your short-term memory is. That's where the triage salience is, and then long-term memory is stored up here in the neocortex, diffusely. So when we are making things, memories, into our long-term memory, we use things called schema, these illness scripts, okay? So you've got 300 conditions or so in the UKMLA's condition list, A to Z, and then sorted by systems as well, like cardio and resp and all that stuff. But you need to have an illness script for every single one of these things. And what do I mean by an illness script? So an illness script, let's say that we have to learn bursitis. It's a very dark day. We have to learn about bursitis. As a former TNO SHO, believe me, bursitis is not the most interesting thing in the world. But you have an illness script for bursitis in your brain, and imagine it as a long column of memory going down, and it begins with things like the pathophysiology of bursitis, how it presents, how you work it up, which means investigations, how you manage it, and then pearls of little wisdom that you've picked up along the side. So you've got all of this column that's flowing. And what you'll do as you start to become a bit more mature, as a medical student, as a resident doctor, and so on, is that you'll start to have parallel illness scripts, other illness scripts. So bursitis looks a lot like septic arthritis. And when I start to go down the bursitis stepladder in my mind, when I'm taking a history on a patient and I think it's bursitis, yep, the pathophys ticks here, the presentation ticks there, so I know I need to work it up like this. You start to get these lateral processes. And this is where you go from a novice to an expert, the formation of lateral processes. And energy efficiency is working laterally. So you start with this idea of bursitis, down I go and I'm accessing all this information about bursitis. But at the same time, you're moving laterally into septic arthritis up and down here. The more you move laterally, the more energy efficient the process gets. Think about the road smoothing out and smoothing out and smoothing out. You're clearing the brambles between the two different pathways. It becomes more energy efficient, so it's easier to do. Consultants can begin very broad with their nets of illness scripts and narrow things down very quickly, whereas the more junior you are, the more you have to individually go into each illness script and find it and come up with different checklists and things to make sure you don't forget stuff. That stuff happens in flow state automatically the more senior you get. So basically, if I wanted to say what is clinical reasoning, it's the bridge to get you to passing the MLA and becoming a competent, safe foundation doctor. And to do that, you've got to make 300 efficient illness scripts that you have used and utilized and started those lateral processes as well. So how do you make illness scripts? Well, it turns out if we peel behind the curtain, that's what that was. If we peel behind the curtain, we can see that there are 4 pillars of clinical reasoning and how to teach clinical reasoning to students and to doctors, to student doctors, okay? So there are 4 of these things. And I came up with the 4 pillars based on several systematic reviews I've done. So the first one is feedback. So how to give good feedback. Has anyone ever taught you how to give good feedback to someone or how to receive good feedback? Because there's actually a lot of evidence in the psychological literature for how to do it. And so you may be saying, I don't think so. Well, the first thing is Gottman. So Gottman are a husband and wife PhD couple who work as a couple and relationship therapists. And they've had this thing in the States now for, I think it's about 40 years. And they deal with conflict resolution. And the Gottman rules talk about the fact that we have a profound negativity bias. I can give you 10 well done's, you've done this, you've done this, you've done this. And if I say but, all of a sudden your limbic system is activated. Even the most calm, meditative person is just thinking about the negative, right? We do 10 good things at work, we screw up once. What do we go home and think about? The screw up. So negativity bias is profound. Feedback requires the ability for the listener to tolerate distress and know when they're overwhelmed and can't tolerate any more, okay? But for the person giving the feedback to know when you're in complete information overload and it's becoming silly. And actually, you're so flooded that your ERC, that entorhinal cortex, is saying this is just too much. I'm not making long-term memory. I'm in fight or flight threat mode. So I'm just turning everything off now. So you stop learning and you start to become a bit depressed about it all, which makes sense. Miller's Law. So Miller's Law, we've already talked about the 4 to 7 chunks, and make sure you write it down. Get the feedback written, either you or the person giving the feedback. Ideally, the academic who is reviewing you should be writing it down. What about organized group work? So this is about ZPD, the Zone of Professional Development or Personal Development. So this talks about how there is a zone into which you feel comfortable and safe in learning. And if you step outside your comfort zone, that's where growth occurs because there's novelty. Where novelty and stepping straight out of your comfort zone exists really proximally is where you can learn a ton. If you stray too far, then you become overwhelmed very quickly. There's far too much novelty, far too much information. If a second-year medical student was put in resus for 3 weeks, expecting to learn things, the bells and whistles, everything going off, very sick people coming in, you would be very overwhelmed and you actually wouldn't be learning. So zone of that proximal personal development is really important, knowing where is safe for you. But also making sure that the cases are sufficiently difficult that we have to think about things on several different levels and the whole group works together to deal with the difficult things. And the third thing is making sure that we have checklists, good checklists for biases assessments and the like. Which brings us to bias analysis. Thinking out loud is really important for biases. I think it's this because of this, 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 this. And you've got people in the group who will be saying, is that right? Some people will be competitive, but some people are genuinely trying to help you, okay? So that's really important. Thinking out loud makes you less of a bias person, okay? Expert modeling is super important as well. The number one thing that gets people to check their biases is seeing a more expert doctor in their field who they respect actually checking their own biases. So we try to model this as subject experts and teachers. We try to model us doing this so that you see the salience, the importance of this, and then you pick up on it as well. And then actually knowing a bit about biases themselves, okay? Ooh, biases. Ooh. I'd forgotten about this animation. So I like to use the mnemonic FACT. So familiarity bias, anchor bias, your affect at the time, so your emotional state, the context you're in, is it corridor care, are you struggling, have you got 10 patients to see, and then time. If you're on a night shift, you're not going to be making decisions as well. And the fourth one, so schema generation, so making those illness scripts, okay? So the problem, writing a problem list, so the patient has X, Y, and Z wrong with them, and I'm going to address each one in turn. That really helps, because that's forming the illness script, and it's forming the connections between the scripts, so you're addressing multiple problems at once, and seeing how they connect together, and how drugs can interact with each other. Simulation is really important. So simulating the difficult context. So rather than throwing you in resus, we could simulate a cardiac arrest on a mannequin in the medical school where you feel more comfortable. So you can practice that before you end up doing CPR as an F1. It's better to do your first CPR on a mannequin than a real human. And then evidence base. So it's all good making illness scripts, but there's a concept called garbage in, garbage out. Okay, so if we do not give you good evidence-based content or tell you where to go for good evidence-based content as supposed subject matter experts, then we're doing you a disservice. So Garbage in, garbage out. Excellence in, excellence out. Fabulous. So that's a quick video on how we are doing clinical reasoning. So from U to the MLA via the bridge of clinical reasoning. And that's about making these 300 efficient illness scripts, okay? Video number 2 will be a case that I've made up, a pretty simple case, covering all of these 4 pillars to show you what is expected of an excellent case. See you then.